Today we're going to look at the rise and decline of one of your gunpowder empires from the time period. In focus today is the Mughal Empire, which is going to be in modern-day India and the surrounding locations. As a brief overview here, we've already talked about the rise of the Ottomans and the Safavids, which are in the Persian Empire, the old Persian Empire. And then today with your Mughal Empire, you're going to kind of combine all these things together to give you a working contrast and comparison point for all three of the gunpowder empires. What are they sharing? What are they having different? What are some of the details that kind of can separate them or be used to kind of join them together in addition to the land-based and sea-based empires? One of the things you have to look at, therefore, is what allows the gunpowder empires to really take off and flourish. And in some cases, conditions in Europe are actually allowing this to happen. Things like the Catholic Reformation or the Scientific Revolution, different wars of instability that are happening on the mainland, the Enlightenment period towards the end of the time period, all those things factor into the rise and decline of the gunpowder empires because at first the gunpowder empires are kind of left alone to their own devices, and that allows them to kind of gather their own strength against the people that were there beforehand, like the Mughals, for example, coming down from small fractured tribes and principalities at some point. Ottomans, for example, out of review, they were coming from the Mongol world, trying to kick out the Mongols. So all that stuff does come into factor here. The big question, though, is what accounts for the rise, and eventually, why can't they keep pace with Europe? If they have gunpowder and technology like that, that sounds like on surface level they should be able to keep up, but in reality we know that eventually they're going to be taken over and kind of consolidated by Europeans in one fashion or another, whether it be political or economic or multiple causes actually. Here is a representation for the Mughal Empire. You've got a large growth here, and there's a major two expansion time periods here for the Mughals. The first is under Akbar, and that's listed for you in the darker blue to the north. And then the second is under Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb. Those are the ones that are going to be taking over in the latter stages of the empire, right before the middle or early part of the 1700s. And the term Mughal itself comes from a Persian term for Mongol, can kind of give you an idea as to background as to what's going on prior to the initial empire formation and consolidation. The first empire builder is known as the Tiger, Babur, Zahir Aldeen Mohammed. He is going to claim descendancy from Genghis Khan, which is a tactic that some rulers try to do to kind of give themselves more legitimacy, both on the battlefield and politically speaking, since the Mongols were the largest empire prior to all these different formations. He wants to create a Central Asian empire. However, that process is very difficult as there's a ton of real estate to control and different cultural groups are going to stand in his way. So he concentrates on an area where he thinks the wealth will match the risk and the effort there, and that is really India. India at the time, being fractured like it is still very, very wealthy in precious resources like diamonds and gems and others. He, of course, is going to start the process and wave of gunpowder empire by using gunpowder weapons to take the city of Delhi, which is in the northern section of the territory, in 1526. And then we have his grandson, Akbar. Akbar, down the road, will take personal control of the empire and really start the consolidation of power here. He is going to do several things to help him out with that, such as the creation of a centralized administration, such as the creation of ministries. Kind of, if you had to equate that to something we see in modern day politics, think of like the cabinet structure for our federal government, right? The president has a cabinet, and that cabinet has officials, and those officials, or ministers in this case, will lead him to suggestions and stuff like that. Akbar will also be successful in gaining a couple other cities that are in addition to Delhi. So Gujarat and Bengal are going to be very important for the continual spread here of that administration and consolidation of power. And then eventually he'll get into some conflict with some Hindu kingdoms. He will destroy some of those, and that's going to kind of create a little bit of a dichotomy here between Hindu and Muslim and other cultural traditional aspects. Here is his empire when he dies in 1605. So you got a wide range there in the darker section to the north. But then you can also see what we're talking about as far as the independent states that are in the middle and the southern section of India. Those won't come under control of the Mughal Empire until later for different reasons or another. So there are some of the boundary lines you can see. Delhi Square in the middle there. Other cities that are majorly important like Gujarat on the coastline, and then Bengal on the other coastline will kind of give some nice trade avenues there to explore once we get that land under control. And then Akbar eventually gives way to Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb, 1659 to 1707. He is the gentleman that is going to be pushing into southern India. And along the way, the reason this has been very difficult in the past has been constant rebellion. These territories are very rebellious and not want to be taken over lightly by these kingdoms to the north. So they're going to be fiercely territorial, and the rebellions that he is facing are going to be very difficult. Once again, there is a lot of religious tension here between Hindus and Muslims, so much so that he himself will go a step further than Akbar does. Akbar typically is one of the religiously tolerant leaders that we see in this time period. Aurangzeb, not so much. He is going to do several things that are directly in spite of the Hindus, such as replacing certain Hindu temples with mosques, which is a very big deal. He also will put a tax on Hindus called the jizya. That tax is very important as he continues to try to keep the empire going. Money and revenue coming in is vital for that. Eventually, local leaders that are in these little rebellious areas start to get their peoples organized, and central administration becomes very difficult without large military presence, and of course that takes even more money and time and effort. He is the one who provides the largest extent of the empire. When he dies finally in 1707, the empire is going to start to decline rapidly by giving in to some of these rebellions, and of course to the Europeans as they start to push more and more in different coastline areas and so forth. All right, so when we have that rise of power, that power is very swift as it starts to take off. And then northern India, once again, as you start to look at your textbook and then other resources, is more easily conquerable than the central and southern part. Akbar makes the power solidified. He's also making lots of the social changes. He, once again, is going to be very influential in being more of a quote-unquote tolerant leader. Some things that we see here from him include, a creation of a kind of hybrid religion, which is ultimately unsuccessful, but he does try to kind of blend in Hinduism and Islam into one single religion that could be a peaceful go-between between these two cultural groups. He tries to marry a Hindu Rajput princess as a way of kind of bridging those gaps as well. He will eliminate the tax on the Hindus, which is very good for keeping short-term peace, although it isn't good long-term for stability, since obviously he needs the money like everybody else does. He will promote Hindus within the government. That is good for a short term. And finally, the sati and child marriage are outlawed and highly discouraged in the case of child marriage. The sati, of course, is a term that you should know from your gray book and your Quizlet terms and stuff like that. When you do, sacrifice as a wife, that's a very big deal culturally speaking, and something that should obviously be understood by you within notes somewhere. The military power of the Mughals here are obviously within the massive army and cavalry, whether it be horses or elephants, artillery later on down the road with gunpowder will be very influential. They're not a sea-based empire, obviously, because they have no navy. So we know that gunpowder empires, for the most part, do not have the massive extent over sea power as the Europeans do because of that. However, they do allow the Europeans to serve as carriers. for certain goods or military service, which is going to be part of the long-term problem, is that they're allowing Europeans to remain in the area unchecked and actually allowing them to house and transport their own things back and forth. The firearms that they purchase from the Europeans are heavily bought and expensive, and oftentimes out of date. The Europeans typically are not giving the best and newest technology to the Indians for good reason. There is a limited local production, which I believe your video that you watched on the Mughals points out. However, as far as a massive scale operation here, not nearly as large as the Europeans that are producing overseas. And then finally, as a pretty much hallmark of the Mughal armies, very large, however very poorly trained. And in essence, they're trying just to throw people, which is what they can do with a 1/4 of the world's population in the short-term control. That's what you see happening for all that. The poor are often the easily draftable, and instead of training them like we saw in other gunpowder empires like the Janissaries of the Ottoman world, you don't see that same kind of output here from the Mughals. Architecturally speaking here, you have a really, really nice blending of different cultural styles. We know the Islamic and the Hindu style. We're also going to add Persian to this, since they're often to the side there to the west. You still have a Persian influence here from years and years, if not generations, of access and communication. So we see things like the domes and the arches and the minarets. However, you start seeing local ideas of Hindu ornamentation and overhanging balconies of Islamic tradition, gardens. All of these things are a blending of the three cultures, which is really cool. And the most famous example of this, of course, is the Taj Mahal, built by the Emperor Shah Jahan as a tomb to his wife, who passed away during childbirth. He's going to undertake this massive building, which serves as a glorious tomb slash visiting location that we now know as one of the biggest tourist destinations in all of the world. And there's a visual of that for you. The Taj Mahal took around 20,000 workers to build, and it took about 18 years. And it's actually white marble that's overlaid over regular brick. So you'll see just a large extent of building capacity here. And then from the sides, it doesn't really do it justice. The inside contains great ornamentation that if you ever have the chance to visit, you should partake in that. Other architectural examples, including cities that are in like Agra, show that same kind of basic cultural, unity of different styles. So there's a couple of examples that you can look at besides the Taj Mahal. And then, of course, once again, overhanging balconies and minarets, which are Muslim. It's in the places such as the Fatehpur Sikri, which is a hall of private audience where the leaders would be entertained and have to do a state business. Eventually, all good things come to an end. With the Mughals are no different. Public works, like the Taj Mahal, are going to drain the treasury because obviously 20,000 workers over 18 years costs a lot of money to do. Eventually that decline also is in part because of the costly wars that are going to be taking place, especially by Aurangzeb, to try to conquer the southern portion of India. He wants to go there because not only is it egotistical for him to do so and provide for his legacy, however, there are resources down there as well, especially in certain regions in the center that have lots of diamonds and other natural resources. He wants to really get his hands on that, and so any kind of reserve that there was in the treasury is quickly being depleted. And of course, this is to say nothing of the potential internal issues that are happening between the Hindus and the Muslims, which will actually carry over itself even all the way into World War II, when eventually we have the independence of India from Great Britain and we have the creation of the state of Pakistan and Bangladesh in addition to India. You've got a lot of internal issues here, uprisings and revolts that are happening because of these differences between Hindus and Muslims. And then to make matters even more problematic, to the west there with the Persian area where modern-day Iran is, you've got the Safavids. That little area is also sending different people in bands for invasion. And so all of these warrior bands are kind of converging when there start to be weaknesses here in the Mughal Empire with that decline. Eventually, we kind of can hallmark different talking points for the decline, in addition to broad strokes like war and internal issue. Some of those finer points include a very repressive tax system, which once again is highlighted by the jizya, which is that tax that was put on Hindus. That's very few benefits seen from the poor. It really is just seen to increase the pocketbooks of the emperors there. And then you have an extensive bureaucracy here leading towards corruption on a very large scale. Regional states are going to be very influential and getting wealthy as they build their own independent states up, and then they allow those independent regional states, well, not independent yet, but they're about to be independent, they will allow European groups like the British and the French to come in, and that's going to start this snowball effect here of of issue for them. Some of your later emperors are going to be not taking the same tactic as Akbar did, which is allowing Hindus to work in the government. So you're basically saying to your populace of 80% of the population, which are Hindus, that none of them can work in the government, and that's going to be a very big scale issue and actually be very problematic moving forward. And ultimately, the Europeans, once again, are not giving the good stuff to the Mughals. They cannot match the European development or modernization, and because those firearms that they are buying are extremely expensive and not up to date, you have a lot of differences here with styles and technology. Eventually, firearms are very expensive, and some of these nomadic warrior groups that were part of the Mughal armies had for longest time not been used to having weapons like that, and so their apprehension does not make this any easier. The Mughals, without an army and without technology and without new money coming in and with so many internal problems, it's only natural that they're going to eventually fall apart and give way to a colonial power.